Welcome to another edition of Radio Influencers, a podcast series we're doing for Radio Update. I'm your host, Andy Meadows. On today's ep, I want to expand on an article I wrote recently for Radio Update called Scary AI Quotes. Yikes, I forgot how spooky that pic was. Fun fact, that pic was generated by AI. Plus, I want to show you some examples of a new AI development, Google's VEO 3. But first, let's go over the results from our recent Radio Update polls. Wednesday's Weekly Wire question did well, but did not go the way I hoped. The question was, what should our artist separation be for the biggest superstars in our formats? Playing off last week's outdated artist separation rules episode where we used Morgan Wallen as an example. It seems a majority, albeit a slight one, disagrees with me and still thinks the superstars in a format should have 45 minutes or more of separation. If you're new to radio or have never done music logs, every music scheduler lets you set up artist separation rules so the software can adequately separate the artist the way a programmer wants, and you don't have to do a bunch of manual editing to make it work and look the way you want it to look. 27.6% said 45 or more, followed by 15 or less, and 15 to 30 minutes, which tied at 25% each, and 30 to 45 minutes came in last with 22.4%. Now, do keep in mind, these are all radio decision makers from all different departments responding, but I am disappointed because I vehemently disagree in that approach to artist separation. Like I said on last week's episode, it runs counter to how audiences actually consume music these days. But I'll get off my soapbox for now so we can get into today's topic. If you have any questions after watching or listening, email them to me at andy@radiostationconsultant.com or editor@radioupdate.com, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Yes, I know I talk a lot about AI, and many of you are tired of hearing about AI because seemingly everyone talks about it a lot. It's on every podcast, taking over your social feeds, and in every TED Talk, seemingly. But it's the story of our time. It's here to stay, can't be ignored, and we all have to come to grips with the fact that we cannot compete with people who embrace AI and use it if we don't embrace it ourselves. All that being said, it scares the crap out of me too. And it also scares the heck out of people I know who are even smarter than me on all of this tech stuff. That's why I wrote the Scary AI Quotes article with the creepy header image. So let's go through a few of these quotes I mentioned from people on the inside of the race to build AI and famous futurists. Then I'll share a few new examples as well. First, billionaire and Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates with a quote from earlier this year. In 10 years, AI will do what doctors and teachers do. Humans won't be needed for most things. Obviously, that's a terrifying quote, but it also might be true. When AI first came out, the initial fear was that it would eliminate any remaining low-skill, low-pay jobs that automation hadn't already wiped out, making it harder for middle and lower-class workers to make a living. This hasn't happened yet. Instead, some of the first jobs it's come for are on the creative side. Hollywood now needs less writers because AI can generate a higher volume of first scripts than all the writers in the world could possibly generate. So now they just need a handful of writers to fine-tune scripts, hence why we had a 148-day writer's strike in 2023. Audio and video editors are also in lower demand now that AI can do some of the heavy lifting, even more after a recent development I'll share in a few minutes. The same goes for a wide variety of other professions where people use their brain instead of their hands to make things. It's also why many radio people have reservations about AI putting them out of work, and they use that as a naive way to justify ignoring it altogether. So it's not hard to imagine Bill Gates' quote coming to fruition. The only thing he may be wrong about is the timing. It might not take 10 years. Here's an oldie but goodie from Stephen Hawking. The development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. It would take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate. Humans who are limited by slow biological evolution couldn't compete and would be superseded. I think that fits the definition of scary AI quotes pretty well, but it also ignores our ability to turn it off, redirect it, and put in safeguards as we're building it that could keep those things from happening, even if bad actors or a rogue state intentionally tried to use AI for nefarious means, which they absolutely will. Side note, there's a good biopic about Stephen Hawking's life that I recommend, by the way, although it's a little depressing at times. And another from Eliezer Yudkowsky. I'm sure I messed up that pronunciation. AI doesn't hate you, nor does it love you, but you are made of atoms, which it can use for something else. Another dark one that's hard to argue with, and another reason why many of the top AI minds are actively asking for more government regulation on AI. From the counter-argument, a little more positive statement. Here's a quote from one of them, Demis Hassabis, who spent his whole life trying to understand the human mind, which he calls the most intriguing object in the universe. And now as the Google DeepMind CEO, he's making it his mission to use AI to cure all diseases. Overall, as I said in the article, there's a prevailing feeling within the tech world that anything with a human isn't scalable. This concept is being openly accepted by most of the business community now, including media companies and media-adjacent companies. Even at NAB last year in both Vegas and New York, I heard companies trying to sell us things, bragging about how few employees they have now instead of how big they are. Here are two more recent examples of AI quotes. First, from former Google CEO and chairman Eric Schmidt, who said this during a TED Talk interview.
The eventual state of this is the computers running all business processes.
Later in the talk, which I encourage you to watch all of because it's a really good conversation, Eric makes a great point about how AI is basically a bunch of computers talking to each other. And right now, they're mostly talking in English or some other language humans understand. But we should be on the lookout for them to one day decide that developing their own language to talk computer to computer is more efficient, which would mean they're speaking a language we don't understand, killing our ability to tell what they're up to, he warns, and says if we see that, we need to unplug it immediately, which I agree with him on that for sure. On a lighter note, here's a funny but also insightful conversation about AI between two legendary comedians and friends who host the weekly Superfly podcast together, David Spade and Dana Carvey.
I feel like because of AI, it might be the end of Instagram pretty much in a couple years and OnlyFans. Because there's when you go on Instagram, what are you really looking at? You're looking at photos. They can be, you don't know for sure if they're doctored.
Nope.
Videos of people doctored. Sports news, they have like the announcers going, and this fat comes up to base, he throws it out, oh, man, I would have pissed my pants in that place. And it's the real guy's voice, and it's a real scene. You don't know. And they have newscasters going, well, and more news today, they tell a real story. And you're like, did they say that? And so it's getting so blurry. It makes me want to look at Instagram less because you'll send somebody something. They go, fake. Dude, this guy can't fall that far. This truck can't jump like that. And you go, oh.
Well,
so it takes the fun out of it.
By the way, that's a really good podcast that I recommend to anyone. It's hilarious, especially if you're an SNL fan from either of their eras or from now. But I don't think Instagram or TikTok are in any immediate danger of losing user attention and market share, because my optimistic and hopefully not naive view is that in the aggregate, we'll get a better internal filter for recognizing what's real and what's fake by being more diligent about checking sources and not believing everything we see on the internet, which is a good rule of thumb to begin with. A few weeks ago, Google released something many consider a game changer in the AI space, VEO 3, the next generation of their AI video generator that turns your text into video, along with a bunch of other things on the video front. The first versions of this were laughably bad. I don't know if this was specifically created in Google's VEO 3, but in a text-to-video AI generator. And it's the one we've all seen. Everyone remembers the Will Smith eating spaghetti example. That was obviously so laughably bad that most people kind of wrote it off. Text-to-video from AI is not a viable option to create anything professional enough to use. I always say that's because everyone thinks of things based on how they look today. But with advancements moving as quickly as AI is, you always have to think about what it's going to look like 6 months from now and then extrapolate that over how many years you're trying to plan for, 5 or 10 or 15, and react accordingly. The good thing is, at this point, we're getting enough clarity on how quickly these things are advancing that we can now fairly accurately envision what they're going to look like in 6 weeks, making that extrapolation and planning even easier. For instance, here's some examples of what Google's new VEO3 can do.
I'm one with nature now.
Nature would prefer some personal space.
The microfilm is in your ticket.
They're watching the north exit. Use the service tunnel.
According to this old sea chart, the Lost Island isn't myth. We must prepare an expedition immediately.
Where were you on the night of the bubble bath?
Welcome to a non-existent car show. Let's see some opinions.
I mean, man, the acceleration is crazy. You look far, step on the pedal, and you are there.
I feel safe with him in an SUV, and it seems to be like the right type of car for him.
I think the range is only going to get better. Sorry.
We don't want to drive gas cars anymore.
Yeah, no more gas cars.
You can see
pretty incredible stuff, right? I mean, it's definitely scary, which is why I included it in this episode. I mean, you could see why some people would watch some of that and not be able to tell that it wasn't real. I mean, a keen eye can catch a couple of things in there. Like there's a part where a Hell's Angel guy is wearing a motorcycle jacket, and Hell's Angels is misspelled, which is something AI for some reason misspells things, which you wouldn't think computers would do, and it gets numbers backwards sometimes, which I don't understand. I'm sure they'll work all that out, but that's the thing, is you got to think about how, if it already looks this realistic now, what's it going to look like again in 6 weeks, 6 months, a year, so on. But right now, VEO3 isn't really a viable option for most of radio just because of the price point. It's $250 per month for a limited amount of credits. And the way a lot of these work now, they've figured out, like, instead of just giving you unlimited amount to generate stuff, because then one person would use that to generate content for their entire organization if they're a big, huge organization. So they do it by credits. Because of computing power required to do this stuff, it probably makes more sense for their business model. So I understand that, but it does make it to where if you're an individual trying to create a fair amount of stuff for maybe even just your company or a client or two, you can run out of those monthly credits pretty quickly. So $250 a month would go pretty quick. So I don't think it's a viable option for radio yet at that price point. However, that will soon get cheaper as the technology gets even better. The main way I see radio using something like VEO3 is to create really interesting videos to go along with our audio that make them more interesting for social media and YouTube. Here's an example. Let's say you do a 3 or 4 minute morning show break talking about a news story where someone from your coverage area got lost on a solo hike and got stranded in the woods alone for like 2 weeks. That seems to happen a fair amount in different parts across the country. So you take the angle of which one of us on the show would last the longest alone in the woods. You share your internal opinions on that, and then you ask the audience to weigh in, so it turns into something you can carry over for another break or two, and now you've got 9 to 12 minutes of really compelling morning show audio. So you feed that into AI to pull multiple 60-second reels of the best parts and do a transcript and summarize that for you. Use that as a prompt to get Google VEO to generate some 60-second videos to pair with the audio, and use AI to edit all of that together And you've got some really compelling audio-video reels to share on social media, scheduled by AI, by the way, if you want, that are significantly more likely to go viral than just the audio and a static picture of the show or station logo, because we've all seen the statistics on how much more likely something is to get traction on social media if it's got video included with it. Plus, thanks to AI, you've done all of that with only a couple of minutes of extra work. By the way, I said VO3 isn't really a viable option for radio right now at the $250 per month price point. The VO2 is still pretty good, and that is cheaper. So if you were going to play around with it, I would try to start with a free trial if they're still offering it when you watch this video. But I would start with VO2 at the lower price point until they get VO3 a little cheaper. What people love about social media, YouTube, and AI is that it levels the playing field. What people hate about social media, YouTube, and AI is that it levels the playing field. I didn't misspeak. What I mean is there are some people who are really excited about where the world is headed because there are no longer gatekeepers keeping you from creating anything you want to create, thanks to social media and YouTube giving everyone a platform, and AI making content creation much cheaper and more efficient, like the radio-related example we just went through. But there are also a lot of people, likely more than the first camp, who are justifiably very frightened that this is going to take their jobs, reduce their value to society and therefore their paychecks and lifestyle, and negate the hard work they put in, gaining all the experience they've gained so far. This is especially true of broadcasters. We like getting to decide who gets on the air and who doesn't, whether that's an on-air personality or an artist we're playing. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this phrase in the past few years. I've paid my dues. Why shouldn't they? Especially when they're talking about an up-and-coming on-air personality. I get it. I came up through the old model as well, and there were good things about the old model. You don't get really good at radio or anything for that matter until you put in your 10,000 hours. So slowly and methodically moving up the ranks generally made for better radio. And I know that I've been labeled an optimist a few times throughout my career, but like I said in my Cars Without Radios article this week, AI doesn't concern me in our industry because I believe radio is uniquely positioned to benefit more from AI than be damaged by it because of how understaffed we already are. And when it comes to YouTube and social media allowing people who, in our minds, didn't pay their dues, becoming famous seemingly overnight, often for doing something eerily similar to what we do, i.e. a podcaster whose show has radio-style features and benchmarks, what we're often not seeing is the time, effort, and energy they put in behind the scenes to make the transition from their other field to the new one. Unfortunately, with AI, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for how business across industries should react to AI's rapid evolution. In my opinion, the right solution for radio is to embrace AI tools in an ethical manner, adopting and using those AI tools to make our limited staffs look, feel, and sound like much larger staffs, which also has the side benefit of positioning us well for those sought-after digital dollars that we so desperately need to replace those terrestrial dollars that we've lost. But what do you think about AI's rapid development, and how are you using AI in your stations? How are your employees, how are your staff reacting to AI? Are they using it daily? How are they refusing to embrace it? I'd love to hear from you. If you've got any thoughts on this, email me at andy@radiostationconsultant.com or editor@radioupdate.com. And as always, if you have any thoughts you'd like to share on this or any other radio topic, email that to submissions@radioupdate.com. Thanks for listening, watching, and reading. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Radio Influencers. Radio Influencers is a Radio Update production. New episodes are released on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern.